Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We're going to start off with an NIL roundtable that happened in Washington, D.C. yesterday. Nick Saban was one of the many people that spoke there that we will get into some of the comments that were made. Some very interesting things came out of this meeting. Then we're going to get into some NFL talk for the next two segments. We're going to start with the NFL free agency is well underway, and as we all know, free agency directly impacts the draft and some of your favorite players from college football, where they're going to be end up playing at the end of the year. So we will get into some of those decisions and how it affects some of your favorite players. Then we're going to jump into some wide receiver rankings that were released by Mel Kiper going into this draft following the scouting combine, and there are a couple of things that I disagree with, so I'll give my own top 10 and you guys can have a fun let's say a civil argument, if you will, in the comments. And then to finish off the show, we have a great another Spotlight Wednesday. Today we're going to talk about the Florida Gators, a team that there's a lot of question marks, I won't lie to you, but we'll try to break down what the path to victory is for them, what the path to not so victory is for them, but we'll go into all of the different avenues that this Gator season could go under. But before we start, I do want to remind you all that we get a ton of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get on the screen and to see your comments and see your questions, and maybe we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the link at the bottom of the screen. GSMCpodcast.net is a huge help to us here at the network. Obviously, with tip and donations, a huge help to us keeping everything rolling here. And then obviously to you all to have your questions on the screen, see your name pop up on the screen, and ask a question that I can answer in real time. So definitely use GSMCpodcast.net if you have any questions or comments. But let's jump right in. We have had a crazy time around college football. Conference realignment is really starting to come to a head, it feels like, as is the playoff negotiations. And another thing that has had a lot of stories recently and is really gaining traction around a lot of different social circles is NIL. It's something that has been a very, very interesting thing to deal with the last couple of years in college football. But yesterday they made at least a small step towards possibly figuring out some of the issues that we are faced with. Ted Cruz, the senator out of Texas, hosted a roundtable discussion in the Capitol yesterday that was centered around NIL and how to move forward, and kind of the need for the federal government possibly to step in and get involved as soon as possible. This had many guests, obviously Nick Saban being chief among them. The Cavender twins, two people that some of you might know, Haley and Hannah Cavender, played basketball at Miami for some time and were kind of on the forefront of NIL for a very long time, have become kind of TikTok stars, whatever that actually means. But all of them had some very interesting quotes. Greg Burns also spoke, the AD from Alabama, so tons of very interesting perspectives in this group, and it seemed that a lot of it came away with some consensus around the room about the future of college football and at least the idea of what the structure should look like. One of the big things that everyone was pretty steadfast agreed on was revenue sharing needs to be a part of the future of this sport. And if you're wondering what revenue sharing is, it's essentially whether that's through media deals or just straight through the university, it's the players getting a certain cut of the money that they bring in. Which is something that I tend to believe should have been in place a long time ago, and I think it possibly could have been if we went into this NIL world with a little bit better of a roadmap. But as of right now, it seems like there's a lot of consensus around that idea. I totally agree that this needs to be part of the sport because these are the people bringing the money in, and they need to be compensated by the money that is brought in, instead of being compensated by having to go out and do more work to get that extra change that some of these kids need. So I'm all favor for that. The employee model was not a popular one at all by any means. So there does need to be some finagling between the line of you want revenue sharing, but you don't want employees. And sometimes those have been kind of tied together in a lot of these different proposals. So it'll be interesting to see if they're able to kind of find their way in between, find their way into the gray area in between these two opportunities and find a system that works. But one of the very interesting quotes that I think all of us can agree on is the Home Education and the Workforce Committee. One of the members, Representative Burgess Owen, said college sports is essentially pure chaos, and he thinks that the employee model would essentially kill college sports altogether. I'm a little bit more. I'm not necessarily as that doomsday about it. I think there are ways to make the employee model work, but I totally understand this idea because there's worry that if the universities in particular have to go out and pay all of the athletes, even down to swimming and volleyball, which they should be getting paid. There's no two ways about that. But at the end of the day, there's only so much money to go around. For the majority of athletic departments, football is the only sport that makes money. Sometimes you'll have men's basketball, also even less times you'll have men's baseball as well. Those are the elite of the elite athletic departments that have those three teams bringing in a certain amount of revenue to the athletic department. So there's only so much money to go around. There's only so many sports that are bringing in a certain amount of money, right? So you have to be very careful with the way that they allocate resources. So I totally understand why the employee model, at least employees of the university, just doesn't work. It doesn't make much sense. It's not something that is going to be sustainable at the very least. They might be able to make it work for a couple of years, but it's going to be really, really tough to make that work long term with the current balance sheets that a lot of athletic departments are dealing with, that a ton of them are in the red right now. So it would be a very, very tough thing to get their head around. And Nick Saban is someone that for a long time, and even yesterday when speaking about this, was all for revenue sharing. He has been someone that has been kind of on the forefront of that battle that a lot of people have been fighting around college football for a long time. He felt early on that NIL probably wasn't the best way forward, and revenue sharing probably was. But it's another consequence, if you will, of the way that NIL was introduced. All of this started a very, very long time ago. When NIL was introduced, there was no real guardrails. There was no idea of what this entails, what this could possibly, what problems this could create for the players, for the coaches, for administration, for fans, for everyone in between. So they went in without a roadmap, and they're kind of getting what they paid for here. But there were a lot of very interesting bits to this, and I think one of the most interesting things, and a thing that should have been brought up a really long time ago, is the athletes have to have a seat at the table. It was something that Mark Gaston Pierce of the Workers' Right Institution, at Georgetown Law, he said it doesn't make sense for them to not have a collective bargaining agreement among athletes, whether that's of athletes of the SEC and athletes of the Big Ten, or it's school by school basis. I don't know, but I tend to think the conference grouping would be better for this and for in the employee model. I think it could make it work both ways, but we'll see how all this kind of comes to a head. Another very interesting quote was the NIL attorney Darren Hayter, who was on the stand for a couple of different points during this thing, and he said when he was dealing with this, which he deals with a lot of this type of stuff day in and day out, whether it's setting up deals for kids or representing kids in different facets of this new game. But he called it unrestricted free agency on a year-by-year basis. So what we all essentially thought from the get-go is now being confirmed by people that see it in real time and see it very, very up close. He also mentioned that these work weeks that we are putting athletes under, especially college athletes, with a million different things they have to worry about on top of this, but 40 to 60 hours a week working and practicing and playing, all of that stuff is just insane. So he was a big advocate for that. Another person that I'm blanking on the name of, but had brought up the 40 to 60 hour work week. I got to be totally honest, I think that might be a little bit low. I genuinely believe that these kids are working at least 60 hours on their craft, and obviously it's different from sport to sport. But in the college football world, I would not be surprised at all if a lot of these kids, the amount of time they clocked working on being at practice or being at games or working out on your own or putting in film tape study, all of that stuff combined, I'd be shocked if it was anything under 50 hours a week because these kids work just tirelessly to be the best versions of themselves, at least the majority of them. There are some that take full advantage of the good parts without having to deal with the bad parts, but that's a totally different story. But one of the big topics of conversation throughout this whole thing was the Dartmouth men's basketball team. They recently had a vote where they decided they were going to unionize and try to become employees, and now that is going through the legal system, and we will see what happens there. But that decision is huge. If they are able to pull off becoming employees of Dartmouth University, and Dartmouth has to start playing out of their own pocket, things get a little bit sketchy for everyone else in college athletics. I think there's a lot of sentiment. I don't necessarily know the balance sheets at Dartmouth by any means. I don't have them in front of me, but I got to assume they have a alumni base that is more willing to put up a certain amount of money to help this be viable at Dartmouth. But that doesn't mean it would be viable at Vandy, or it would be viable even at a place like Kentucky, or even viable long-term for a place like Georgia. Like, there are a number of schools that would be not able to pull off this model. So it'll be interesting to see what that decision looks like and if that decision has massive ripple effects, because the way I'm looking at it right now, it looks like it could go in the way of the Dartmouth athletes, and if it does, a lot of more athletes are going to follow suit, because if they can, win and become employees and get a steady paycheck, I think they would be much more preferred to that than having to run out and get NIL deals and work overtime on top of everything else that they do to make any money at all. So this is something that I will definitely be keeping my eye out on, because a lot of people will follow suit if they continue. But let's get to the Nick Saban of it all. He came in later on in the discussions and had some very interesting comments. Some that people have kind of ran with and have created this kind of doomsday scenario in college football. And I agree with some of his sentiment, but let's get to a couple of quotes before we jump in. He started with, well, all the things I believed in all of these years of coaching, 50 years of coaching, no longer exist in college athletics. He also mentioned a story where he was on a recruiting visit nearing his end at Alabama, nearing his retirement, and his wife, Miss Terry, came to him and said, why do we do this anymore? All these kids care about is the money that they make. That makes sense. I totally agree that there is a sentiment around older school coaches like Nick Saban that this NIL game has changed the way that they can interact with their athletes. They have to be a little bit more accommodating. They have to be a little bit nicer. They have to, they don't have nearly as much power over these situations as they used to. And some of that is really bad. Some of that creates problems not only for the coaches and the personnel in these departments before the players, because NIL has become a tool for a lot of schools to take advantage of these kids. I don't think there's any two ways about that. They know that this is a totally new landscape in the world of college football. It was thrown in with a very little guardrails, and it was given to a bunch of 18-year-olds that probably hadn't taken a law class in their entire lives. So a lot was thrown on these kids' shoulders, and some people took advantage of that. So it's created a lot of problems. There's no two ways about that. I mean, NIL is a totally new thing in this world. It is a thing that is not fun for a lot of the fans out there. But the way I look at it is NIL created a different college football. It didn't ruin college football. It didn't bury college football. It didn't change it for all eternity. And he also went on to talk about how Nick Saban, that is, went on to talk about how developing players on and off the field was always the biggest part of the game, and should always be the biggest part of the game. And while I totally agree with the sentiment that that is the biggest and most important part of college football, I don't think that's gone. I think it's just different. I think the relationship between the coaches and the players is different because the players have more power, and that's just kind of the way things work. But I think when you look at this, you can still have great relationships with your kids. You can still develop them as players and as men. You can still have incredible kids walk in and out of your program using NIL and using all of the things at their disposal. But at the end of the day, it does create a lot of hurdles to get to that point. It creates a lot of hurdles for coaches that are remarkable coaches like Nick Saban that are a little disenthused by the way that college football is going right now. And you obviously don't want to lose more of these guys because of that reason. But at the end of the day, NIL is a great addition to this sport. It's something that has been needed for a very, very long time. It can be a good entity and a good system. The problem is we threw it in with no regulations. So we didn't give kids time to figure out what was going on. We didn't give coaches time to figure out what was going on. And it became a problem because people are going to exploit openings in the system. That's just the way recruiting works. That's the way a lot of business works. So it's hard for me to sit here and say that NIL is burying college football or burying college sports altogether. It's hard for me also to say that there are not big problems that have come because of NIL that need to be fixed. So there's two sides to the coin. I think NIL is a great thing that is being used poorly right now, that has a poor structure around it, a poor ability to oversee it, and if you can even oversee it because of all the antitrust violations you might be going under, and all of these different things that frankly could have been avoided if we started the process of introducing NIL to college football in 2014. That was when the playoff happened. There were plenty of people still pushing for these players to get paid, especially with the extra games that some of these guys were going to be playing. But they didn't. And they waited, and they decided it was going to just be put into place, and we're going to see what happens. And it's created all these problems. And I think whether it's Congress stepping in or another governing body or, I don't know, Nick Saban himself taking over the reins and fixing all the problems, someone's got to do something. And there will be a lot of people that will be out there the second someone tries to do something saying, no, not that thing. Let's try something different. But just try something. Let's take one step forward. Let's at least attempt to solve some of the problems that are faced around NIL. And then you face the next problem when it comes up. But right now, it's just about taking a step forward. It's just about someone stepping up to the plate and being willing to make the hard decisions that need to be made. And if that's Congress, be my guest. I tend to believe that it will not end up being Congress, but if they want to take a whack at it, please do, because we need someone to at least try. Because there have been a lot of people yelling the same thing for a long time, and not a lot of fixes to those problems. So something's got to happen. If it's Congress, great. If it's someone else, great. I genuinely couldn't care who it is. I just need someone to make a move on this and start creating some solutions to these problems. But that was a long-winded little segment there, and I apologize for that. But this is a very complex issue, and a lot of things changing on a day-to-day basis. So we'll try to keep you up to date as much as possible. Obviously, a lot of this stuff happens behind closed doors and is a little hard to keep track of, but whenever something like this happens, like a roundtable out in front of everyone that's televised, there's a ton you can grab from it. And I think yesterday was a step in the right direction. I think we got a lot of consensus across the board. We got a lot of confidence going forward, but at the end of the day, all of that is words, and we need action as quickly as possible. So it'll be interesting to see if Congress steps up, but for right now, we just have to wait and hope that some of these issues will not be issues come 2025 or 2026, whenever that is. But NIL is an ever-changing and ever-confusing thing in the college football world, but it seems like we're making baby steps towards a solution. So that'll do that for that segment, because there's so much there that is continuing to develop that we will definitely get to down the road. But let's get to the NFL segment, or the NFL portion of the show, really. When we come back from this break, we're going to get into NFL free agency a little bit, kind of blur the lines here, talk about how some of the moves that happened, especially Kirk Cousins, affects some of your favorite college players and where they might end up playing at the next level. So definitely stick around for that, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live, I choose to dip, you choose to fight, I lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the NIL roundtable that happened in the nation's capital yesterday. Some very interesting quotes from Nick Saban in that craziness that was going on. A lot of very interesting people spoke at that roundtable, and a lot of very interesting things came to. But let's jump into some NFL free agency. Obviously, this is the time of the year where college football and NFL overlap a little bit. We get to see some of our favorite players from some of our favorite teams find their new homes, and a lot is happening with regard to NFL free agency right now. Tons of guys on the move, and that obviously has a big impact on what happens with some of your favorite players, like Malik Neighbors, like even Caleb Williams, some of these incredible players that we've enjoyed watching for so many years. Their lives just changed a little bit with some of these news. So this is a very interesting piece from The Athletic. Nick Baumgartner from The Athletic released this, and I just thought it was really, really interesting and was a fun way to kind of blur the lines between NFL and college football here for a second. But NFL free agency has been off the walls. There's no two ways about that. It has been insane every which way. It has been all over the place. There have been tons of moves. The running backs are starting to get some of the respect back that they had lost over the last couple of years. But the one big move that has the biggest effect on draft day in my mind and in a lot of people's mind is Kirk Cousins. He was the quarterback that a lot of people were waiting to sign somewhere. A couple of days ago, he signed with my Atlanta Falcons for a 4-year deal, and that leaves a ton of questions in the draft process, not only for the Falcons, for Minnesota, and for a number of other teams following that. So let's start with Atlanta, though. So when Atlanta was going into the draft, there was a lot of consensus really around Atlanta that it was going to be an edge rusher. At least leading up to the combine, there was a lot of push behind Jared Verse. Some guys going after Dallas Turner, some guys going after Liati Latu. So all three of those guys would be great. I would be happy with any one of them. But now there is a little bit of a different situation, obviously. When you bring in a quarterback, you want to give him as many toys to play with as possible. And Atlanta's not lacking that right now. They have Bijan Robinson, obviously the remarkable running back from Texas. Drake London, who came from USC and had a remarkable rookie and sophomore year in the NFL so far. And then Kyle Pitts, who was coming off an injury last year, but still has a lot of juice in his legs and can play really, really good football. So tons of talent already on that Atlanta team. Another move that they made that will affect the draft day is Darnell Mooney was signed as possibly a wide receiver 2, possibly a wide receiver 3, and I guess we'll figure that out on draft day because I think it's between wide receiver and edge. I tend to lean edge at this very moment just because they have not signed an edge in free agency, but there are a lot of rumors surrounding them and possibly Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack, who are currently in some precarious situations with the Chargers. So it could be that they add a edge before the draft, and then you're right back in the same situation where it's wide receiver or it's edge, and then I tend to believe they would go wide receiver. I think if they had one position or one player in free agency at each of those positions, I think you just go back to wide receiver, and that's exactly what Baumgartner thought in this piece. He had Malik Neighbors being the pick for Atlanta at the 8, and I think if they were to sign someone like Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack, I think that's a real possibility. Now, I will say I tend to think that this wide receiver group is a little bit deeper than the edge group in terms of stepping in and making an immediate impact. So Atlanta has an early pick in the second round that they absolutely could pick a wide receiver with. So I think whichever one they get in at the 8th overall pick, they will get the opposite at the 43rd. So there could be, Jared Verse at 8 and then Ladd McConkey or Malachi Corley at 43, or it could be Malik Neighbors at 8 and then Adisa Isaac at 43. So there are a number of different options that they could go after. There are a number of different ways that they could attack this, but if I had to bet and make a pick here, if they were to sign another edge rusher, I'd lean that they would pick the best player on the board, which is something that the Atlanta front office has become very, very fond of. But also another wrinkle to this is I don't think this takes them out of the quarterback pool necessarily. I think there's a real reality where Taylor Heineke, who was there last year, is possibly going to be cut. I think Desmond Ritter's future is very uncertain in Atlanta right now, so I wouldn't be surprised if in the 3rd round or the 4th round, maybe they pick up someone. Maybe Bo Nix is still sitting there. I'd be a little bit surprised if he was still sitting there, but if he is, I could see them snagging him up. Spencer Rattler is another guy I would watch because of his arm talent, and the one big knock on him being some bad decision making. If you're sitting behind and learning from Kirk Cousins, that decision making is going to become a lot better, a lot quicker. So I think that's someone definitely to watch for Atlanta in the later rounds, possibly day 3, to take a flyer on a quarterback and have a backup that is young and possibly can take over the reins after this Kirk contract kind of wraps up. But Minnesota is the other side of this, obviously. Kirk leaving there, he's been there for a number of years. They have a number of talented receivers. Justin Jefferson, obviously the best receiver in the entire league. Jordan Addison came on last year and was just remarkable for them. KJ Osborne, I believe, is a free agent right now, but if they were to re-sign him, that's a great duo or a great trio to start with. So I think there is a lot of push in this piece. Baumgartner had what I would have, I think, in a mock draft today. I think Minnesota is going to be the team that ends up trading up to get that fourth quarterback. I think the quarterbacks will go 1, 2, and 3 with Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels in whatever order you want them to go in, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But Minnesota, I think, is the other team that has the draft capital, has the position. They're at 11 right now. Say the Chargers at 5, which is where Baumgartner had them trading up to. I think that makes a lot of sense. The Chargers are not necessarily pressing for a quarterback or for one of these big-time wide receivers. A lot of the mock drafts have had them getting Brock Bowers. I think they could get Brock Bowers at 11. So it's very possible that Minnesota trades up from 11 to get that 5 pick, takes J.J. McCarthy, and starts kind of a new era in Minnesota. There is a chance that if they don't decide to trade up, that the Giants could snag him at 6, but I'd be a little bit surprised just because of the contract that Daniel Jones is currently under. It might be a little bit harder to make all that work. But for right now, I would be on the watch definitely for Minnesota to trade up and possibly take J.J. McCarthy, who is really just around the corner when you think about it at Michigan. And then there are a number of teams that are preparing for new quarterbacks coming in. We just talked about Minnesota. They added Sam Darnold. And I tend to believe they have no intention of Sam Darnold being their day one or starter at all through the season if everything, no injuries or anything like that. But there are a number of other teams doing that. So the Patriots brought back Jacoby Brissett to New England. He's someone that has been a backup for a very long time, is one of the better backups in the entire NFL when you take into account all of the different things, whether it's on-field play or locker room guy, building up younger guys. He's incredible at all of it. So he's someone that I think is primed to be a backup for one of these talented top 3 guys. And then the Commanders did the same thing. They added Marcus Mariota from the Eagles on a 1-year deal. So another guy that has sat behind some young kids. Jalen Hurts a year ago, Desmond Ridder when he was in Atlanta. That one didn't go quite as well, but he is someone that has played a lot of football, has been in the NFL for a really long time. So definitely someone that I like a lot, and I think will be a great mentor and a great buffer in terms of bringing in a young quarterback that you're not 100% sure is going to hit. You have to have someone back there that at least gives you a nice enough floor to land on rather than, fall through it. But the Bengals are also another team that I'm keeping an eye on because there are some very interesting things happening in Cincinnati. Joe Mixon has signed with the Texans. T. Higgins has requested a trade. Tyler Boyd is a free agent. So there are a lot of things flying around in Cincinnati right now. They currently have the 18th overall pick, and some people think they will go O-line. I tend to think that is the right decision. I think they should stick with O-line. But at the end of the day, if T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd find their way out the door and you can't find a trade for someone else, I think someone like Brian Thomas could be very, very interesting for this role because I like to think he'll still be there at 18. He could go a little bit earlier, we'll see, but he is the wide receiver 4 in this draft according to a lot of people, and we'll get into that here in the next segment. But he's someone that I like a lot and would be a great addition to Jamar Chase in that group if they were looking for wide receiver early on. Again, this is a very deep wide receiver class, so they could wait till the second round and shore up that offensive line in the first round, which I would do if I was them, but who knows? There are a lot of things that could happen that could kind of force their hand in that respect. And let's talk about the Cowboys. Everyone loves talking about the Cowboys at pretty much all times of day, and they have been suspiciously quiet during the early days of free agency. They have said they are all in. It does not look like they are all in from my point of view, but some of the big moves or one of the really big moves that have been made is Tony Pollard has moved on, and it seemed like they were possibly in for the Derrick Henry sweepstakes, but he has signed with the Ravens. So Cowboys are in a bit of precarious situation at running back currently. I believe Deuce Vaughn, I think he's 5'6", the 5'6" running back out of Kansas State, who was one of my favorite players in college and is just a remarkable athlete, but logically probably not an RB1 in the NFL, but I'd love for him to prove me wrong on that. But I do think this definitely opens the door for them to take a running back early on, and I think Jonathan Brooks could very well be that guy out of Texas. One of the very interesting details of all of this is the doctor that did Jonathan Brooks' ACL tear surgery is also the Cowboys doctor. So there is some familiarity there. There is some insider knowledge that they have, I'm sure, about his recovery that others don't. So I think there's a comfortability there. There's obviously a need at running back, so I think that's someone to watch for the Cowboys, definitely. Probably in the second or third round, but we'll see how all of that develops. And then Jacksonville and Calvin Ridley are kind of in a fun back and forth here. Ridley has a chance to move on to the Patriots, but there is a lot of battle between them and Jacksonville right now to see who can get his services. This is interesting for a number of reasons, because if Calvin Ridley does re-sign with Jacksonville, that would mean Atlanta would get the second round pick from Jacksonville for that Calvin Ridley trade. If Calvin Ridley was to move on to the Patriots, that would become a third round pick. So this, has nothing to do with Atlanta in terms of getting Calvin Ridley services, but has a lot to do with them when it comes to the draft. And then, obviously, if Calvin Ridley decides to move on and probably join the Patriots, there's going to be a number of guys that they're going to need to fill that role. Calvin Ridley is obviously a remarkable athlete that can do a number of incredible things. Whether it's the first or second round, I think Jacksonville will definitely snag a receiver if Calvin Ridley decides to move on. There are so many incredible guys in this group, so many guys that route run at an incredible clip, so they'll have their pick of the litter, but they might just have to make a tough decision if Calvin Ridley decides to take his talents to New England. So a lot of stuff happening in NFL free agency. This might be a segment that we revisit as more stuff kind of unfolds and we get a little bit more intel from teams throughout this process. But for right now, there are a lot of teams going all over the place. Kirk Cousins was obviously the big domino that dropped the last couple of days, but still a lot to happen. So we will possibly revisit this and see how it affects some of y'all's favorite college football players that are finding their way to the next level. But for right now, we are going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about the draft. We're going to talk about Mel Kiper's new wide receiver rankings after the NFL Combine, some very interesting bits in there, and some parts where I just outright disagree with them. So I think it'll be a very fun segment, and definitely stick around because I think this one will be very interesting to break down. So stick around with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back. We just talked about some of the NFL free agency moves and how it affects some of y'all's favorite players going into the draft this year. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about the draft. There's a little bit of a draft-heavy show, but with all the stuff coming down the barrel about college football, I feel like this was a good time to go up a level and talk about the NFL just for a second. Mel Kiper most recently released some wide receiver rankings after the Combine. Some very interesting things obviously happened at the Combine. Xavier Worthy breaking the 40 record, being chief among them. Adonai Mitchell and Brian Thomas had remarkable days. Rome Odunze is just a beast in every sense of the word. So a lot of really, really interesting guys in this group. But let's jump in and start with his rankings. So he starts with the normal top three guys that everyone seems to have, and Marvin Harrison Jr. at 1, Rome Odunze at 2, and Malik Neighbors at 3. He then has Brian Thomas at 4, which makes a lot of sense to me. Xavier Worthy at 5, Adonai Mitchell at 6, Keon Coleman 7, Xavier Legette at 8, and Malachi Corley at 9, and then finally Ladd McConkey rounding it out at 10. So a lot of very, very talented guys, a lot of different ways to kind of play around with this, but some changes to this list since the last time he dropped it, which was Keon Coleman fell from 5 to 7 after the combine, mainly because of what the two Texas guys and Adonai Mitchell and Xavier Worthy did at the combine, but not a big drop-off for Keon Coleman, but definitely a little bit of a drop-off for him, at least in Mel Kiper's eyes. Also, Malachi Corley found his way into the top 10. He replaced Troy Franklin, who was at 10 in the previous iteration, so there are a lot of very interesting things. I think one of the things that you might be expecting is Xavier Worthy jumped Adonai Mitchell after the draft or after the combine. That was not the case. Worthy was already above Mitchell before that 40 times, so there's obviously something Mel Kiper sees in Worthy that he likes more than Adonai Mitchell. But let's get into my kind of reactions to this. I think the top 3 are kind of set in stone. Not necessarily the order of the top 3, but Marvin Harrison Jr. is number 1 to me. I think you can't leave that type of physical ability on the table, especially at a receiver position. He does so many things incredibly well, but literally no ball is uncatchable, which is a terrifying thought for any corner out there. He is already built to play against NFL corners. There is going to be no learning curve there. He runs routes incredibly well for someone his size. He can do a number of things. His top-end speed is crazy. So basically, he's an athletic freak. And if you have an athletic freak at wide receiver, it's really hard for teams to pass that up. So I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is locked in at number 1. Number 2 and 3, I think you can take your pick. I don't think there is a bad way to rank Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbors. I think they are both remarkably talented in different ways, but both are just incredible in every way. I would go Rome Odunze's way. In my personal opinion, I think he's just a little bit cleaner of a route runner, a little bit more of a complete receiver, but at the end of the day, whoever you get out of these two guys is going to make a massive difference in your team. And Malik Neighbors, if you get the ball in his hands, he can get gone in a hurry. So he's someone that if you were to have him at number 2, I would not be at all, turn my nose up at that. And also, number 4, I totally agree with him. Brian Thomas, the size and speed factor combination for that kid is just off the charts. Someone that big, someone that long should not be able to move the way that he's able to move, and it's just remarkable to watch. It's why everyone talked about Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas was just over here having almost a 20 touchdown season, like just doing crazy stuff at the wide receiver position. So to me, Brian Thomas, he might be my favorite of the wide receiver group just because of his athletic ability and the things that he can do, and partly because there's so much focus on the top 3 guys that number 4 is, man, might just be as good as the other 3. So it'll be really interesting to see what he can do. He's someone that could go any number of places in the first round, but it feels like more and more a lot of these wide receivers are going to find their way into the first round because, as we know in the draft, there is sometimes this thing that happens where you'll see one guy in one position go, let's say wide receiver, go at number 10, and then another one go at 12, and then another one go at 13, and then teams get nervous, and they start to throw out a lot of the picks that they maybe thought they were waiting till the second round to grab, have now become first-round picks because they feel like they won't come back around to them in the second round. So once Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, and Malik Neighbors are off the board, a lot of things could happen, and a lot of things could change very quickly. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that unfolds. But after that, I start to disagree just a little bit with Mel. I think one of the big ways that I disagree is I would just flip the two Texas guys. I think Xavier Worthy is remarkable. He's obviously, the speed is just insane. I think there are some worries about his about drops with him, but most of that happened when he had a broken hand towards the end of the 2022 season, so that's not necessarily a worry that I have. Incredible route runner, but the size is somewhat of a concern going into the next level. I think even if, he does play physical, and if you watch the tape, man, does he play physical, and I don't think it's going to be a huge problem. I think when you're in those rooms with the NFL scouts, it's going to be tough to overlook 165 at certain points. So I think Adonai Mitchell, the 50-50 ball ability, the size, the strength, the athletic, the speed, everything, I would lean him at the 5 position over Worthy at the 6. But these guys are remarkably close, and both of them are going to make huge differences on whatever team that they're drafted to. At 7, I think I would go Xavier Legette. He's someone that is just an athletic beast. He can fly, can line up all over the field. Had a great day at the Pro Day for South Carolina that happened yesterday, along with Spencer Rattler, who had a great day, who we talked about earlier. Xavier Legette is someone that NFL teams are going to absolutely love. Every time you see him work out, it's just remarkable to watch. So I think he's someone that's jumping off the screen more and more as he gets in front of these scouts more and more. And then in the 8 position, I have Ladd McConkey. So I jump him from the 10 to the 8 in this iteration of things. And it's really just because he's so complete. He can do really anything you want him to do. He has speed. His route running, in my opinion, is better than anyone in the draft, maybe other than Rome Odunze or Xavier Worthy, but you could make the argument it's better than both those guys. So he's someone that pretty much no matter where you put him, he's going to have success because his ability to get open, his stop and start ability is just insane. He's someone that I love a ton and have loved for a really long time. I've been able to watch him up close being a UGA student for some of the time that he was here, but he's just remarkable. He's someone that works his butt off, does everything the right way, especially being at Georgia and being undersized. It's not going to be easy to get on the field, and he ended up being their biggest wide receiver biggest wide receiver these past couple of years, and their highest rated going into the draft. So he's someone that I would never bet against, and I think he's going to have an immediate impact at the next level. And then the final 2 guys, I would have Keon Coleman at 9, and then Troy Franklin I would put back in at 10. I think Keon Coleman, athletic beast, can make every contested catch you could possibly want. So any young quarterback that needs a throw it up there and let a guy make a play type receiver, this is the guy you want. And then Troy Franklin, just so fast, can do a number of different things. I think could be a little bit more of a special teams gadget guy early on, but the sky's the limit for this kid if he's put in the right position. So I really, really like him. And then some honorable mentions because this group is so ridiculous. Malachi Corley, who Mel Kiper had in his list, but I'd have just off it. Javon Baker from UCF, Jalen Polk, another Washington receiver, and then Roman Wilson, the kid out of Michigan. This wide receiver class is just ridiculous. There's different body types, play styles, different abilities. There's different dudes, mentally different dudes. There's so many incredible talents, and obviously some of these guys will be misses. Some will not live up to the remarkable expectations, but I gotta be honest, I think multiple of these guys, at least 2, possibly 3, and maybe even 4, end their career with gold jackets because the talent level at the wide receiver position in this draft is just unlike anything I've ever seen. So if your team needs a wide receiver in this draft, don't you worry about it because there are plenty to choose from. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a Spotlight Wednesday. Today, we're going to talk about the Florida Gators, a very interesting season coming up for Billy Napier and the Gators, so we will break it all down right after this. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the new wide receiver rankings that came out from Mel Kiper recently and some reactions to that. Some places I agreed, some places I disagreed, so definitely check that out. But now it's Spotlight Wednesday, and we got to talk about the Florida Gators because this is one of the more confusing teams going into 2024 in my eyes. They have a lot coming back. They have a lot leaving. They have a coach that is in a very precarious situation, and they have a schedule that's an absolute nightmare. So let's jump on in. The good news for Florida, at least for Florida fans that want Billy Napier to stick around, is this is finally his team. I think any coach that takes over a job, excuse me, I apologize. Any coach that's taking over a job, especially one like Florida or Steve Sarkisian at Texas or Mike Norvell at Florida State, all of these guys, it takes time. It takes time to build out the roster the way that they envision it, build out the roster with the guys that they have relationships with that predate, you walking onto campus. There's so many different things that have to happen before you can really worry about football and worry about your guys and getting the most out of the group that you put together. Finally, Billy Napier is in the position where this is his group. These are his guys. He has said it. So he's going into a season where, at the very least, he has steady footing for the first time during his Florida tenure. But the schedule is just mean. There's no other way to put it. It's just, I don't know who makes the schedules. I don't know what the process is, but man, they don't like Florida. This is just, it's insane to see this schedule, but let's jump right in because I think a lot of your jaws are going to drop as we go through this. But they start the year with Miami coming to town. That is a winnable game. That will be a very interesting game to watch because it'll tell us a good bit about both these teams and the trajectory for their season. But Florida kind of needs that win because it only gets tougher from there. After they get Samford at home, which I really hope is a win. I think it will be. They have the Texas A&M Aggies coming into Gainesville, so get 3 games at home to start the year, 1 in conference, which is a huge help, but it's still tough. 2 or 3 of those games are going to be incredible battles that they are going to really have to hope they win, and then they head to Starkville for their first road game of the season in week 4. These first 4 weeks before their first bye, anything less than 3-1, Florida fans should start to get nervous, and Billy Napier especially should start to get nervous because you kind of need to go at least 3-1 for the rest of the schedule to not kill you in a lot of ways. But after the bye, there is a 3-week stretch in the season that I tend to believe is going to be the defining 3 weeks. I think this is where you will find out if Billy Napier is going to be the head coach next year. I think this is where you will figure out if Florida is on the right track or if they're kind of barreling towards a disaster that will carry on into another coaching regime. But after the bye, they get UCF at home, which is a huge win for them because UCF's a feisty team that is going to be really tough to deal with if the Florida defense has not improved fairly drastically from a year ago. Then they get Tennessee on the road, which is a nightmare place to play. They lost the last time they played in Neyland, but as we know in the recent history of that rivalry, Florida has been the dominating team. So it'll be interesting to see if they can carry that over into Neyland or if Tennessee's starting to flip the switch on that rivalry going forward. And then they get Kentucky at home. Kentucky's a game they absolutely have to win. I don't think there's any argument that these are the games, UCF and Kentucky in particular, are 2 games that just have to be won. I think they fall under the same umbrella of Miami, although I think Miami is a little bit more dangerous just because it's week 1. But UCF and Kentucky are very interesting because those are 2 teams that Florida can beat. Those are 2 teams that Florida is probably as talented at. Kentucky has gotten much more talented over the past couple of years, but both those games are definitely winnable games. They're going to be battles, but you can absolutely win those games, and you're going to have to because if you drop those 2, unless you went 3-0 to start the year again, or 4-0, I guess, to start the year against those elite teams, it could be tough sledding after that. So, in my eyes, coming into their second bye of the year, which is a new wrinkle to the game, 5-2 would be incredible. 5-2 with losses to Tennessee and maybe A&M or Miami would be huge. If they could pull that off, 6-1 would be remarkable. And if they're 6-1 at this point, I will say confidently, Billy Napier should keep his job. Because the next 5 games, no one should be judged off what happens in the next 5 games. So after the bye, things get scary very quickly for Florida Gator fans. It starts with the largest outdoor cocktail party against Georgia. That is not a game where they have fared well over the recent years. Obviously got that win in 2020 when you had Kyle squared with Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts, but those days are gone. So they have really struggled over recent years, and Georgia is returning a ton of talent. I don't necessarily have high hopes for Florida to win this one, but if they can pull it off, man, it would help a lot of things. Because from there, they go to Texas before returning home to play LSU and Ole Miss, and then they go to Florida State to finish the year. So I just said 5 games. I just had 5 teams in this back end of the schedule. All 5 of those teams are top 12 teams in the country. Genuinely top 12 teams in the country. Like, all of these teams have a chance to win a national title. All of these teams have a chance to be the best team in the country this upcoming year. So it's a remarkable stretch that Florida is going to go against. And it's one of those things where it's just a mean 5-game stretch. At least spread out these games. They're going to be nightmares of games no matter where you put them on the schedule, but coming off a bye, going straight into what likely will be the best team in the country, and then you get rewarded, quote unquote, with another top 3, top 4 team in the country. Then you go to then you play LSU, top 10, top 12. Ole Miss, a ton of talent on that team, top 12 to 15. And then Florida State, we don't really know what they'll look like at the end of the year, granted, but right now it looks like they're going to look a whole lot better than Florida. So this is just a tough stretch. It's just mean. But let's get to some of the positives and some of the ways they could navigate this crazy schedule that they have in front of them. Graham Mertz being back is obviously huge. Him understanding the offense, being able to facilitate the ball out to the playmakers, and be a leader for a squad that absolutely needs a big-time leader this year. They need a guy that is going to step up and be the voice of reason, be the guy that says, we can do this, we can overcome the odds and do all of the incredible things we want to do. But you need guys up front to lead, and I think Graham Mertz has to be that guy for Florida to make a big splash this year. Obviously, the guy next to him, Montrell Johnson Jr., huge guy to have back on your team. Obviously, losing Trevor Etienne at that position was very, very tough, but I think a lot of Florida fans would tell you Montrell Johnson is as good, if not better, so he's someone that I really like. I think can make the ultimate difference on this team and create a remarkable running game for Florida this upcoming year, but obviously a lot of that comes down to the offensive line, so we'll see how all of that develops. And then you need someone at wide receiver. You need someone to step up. You have Ricky Pearsall out the door, who was pretty much the go-to guy for the entirety of last season. They did bring in Shamir DK, a transfer from Wisconsin, who was very good friends with Graham Mertz, so they have some connection there. And Eugene Wilson, who was a freshman a year ago and did some really incredible things as a freshman going into his sophomore year. One of those guys has got to step up and be a big impact player for this team. And then the defense has a lot of experience and a lot of talent. The issue I'm having looking at this defense is it doesn't seem that overlaps quite as much as you'd like it to. Obviously, there are plenty of players on this team that have been on this team for a while that are really talented, but the new class is the class that is going to be the really great defense for Florida, in my opinion. Whether that's 2025 or going forward, there's a ton of really talented freshmen that are just sitting a little bit deeper on the depth chart right now. So in my eyes, I think the freshman talent led by LJ McCray, I think there's a lot of those guys that are going to be starting in week 13 that didn't start in week 1. So I think this defense has a lot of questions to be answered, I should say. And I think the young guys might be the ones that have to make those, have to answer those questions, because that's where I think the majority of the talent on this defensive side of the ball lies, in this new crop of young talent that they brought in. But losing guys in the portal was obviously a huge blow to this team. Trevor Etienne and Princely Umanmielen, doing my best, leaving were huge guys on either side of the field that really throw a wrench into the works. But you have talent all over the field. You have a ton of guys to lean on. But a lot of things do have to go your way, and you do have to play really, really good football at least 10 out of the 12 weeks. So it's going to be a really, really tough stretch. And I'll say this as clearly as I can. It sounds ridiculous, I fully understand, but this team could finish the year 5-7 and still be a good team, and still play good football, and still Billy Napier could become a better coach, and the players could rise up to the challenge, and they could still miss a bowl game because of how hard this schedule is. It is insane that they have to deal with this, especially in a year where Billy Napier is not necessarily sitting on stable footing. There are a lot of fans down there that want him fired already, and I promise you they will if the season goes the way that I'm currently picturing it going. But this is going to be an all-time tough coaching job for Billy Napier, and I think he deserves some leeway. And obviously not too much. A lot of this comes down to how you lose these games, how you look week to week, are you improving, that type of thing. But the record is not going to be the thing that shows you how good Florida was this year, is, I guess, the way that I'm trying to put this. If they go 10-2, then it really does show you how good they are. But any way you cut it, this schedule is going to be really, really tough to deal with. I would be shocked if they came out of this year with anything less than 4 losses. And 4 losses might be generous. It might be a nice, I think if you walk out of the season 8-4 as a Gator fan, I would feel incredible going into the rest of the Billy Napier era. Obviously not what you want out there, but this is an uphill battle. I'll be totally honest. And I like Florida, and I think they're capable of catching everyone by storm. And I kind of hope that I'm wrong, just because more teams in the SEC competing, the more fun it is. I really hope that Florida can somehow pull off a Cinderella story, but there are teams that are much more talented, that are in a much better place than Florida, that if you gave them the schedule they're going to have to deal with, they would not fare well remotely. So it could be that everything is going the right direction. It could be that everyone's playing good football, but the wins just aren't coming. And I don't think that bodes well for Billy Napier. I think he's a great coach, but this season might just be an impossible task to overcome. But we'll see. Still a lot to figure out there. A lot of spring intel that will come out that will give us a better idea. And then when the games kick off, we'll figure out what this team's really about. But it's a tough one. I'll say it that way for Gator fans and for Billy Napier down there. But crazier things have happened, that's for sure. But that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It means a lot to us. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow the Facebook, the Twitter or X, the TikTok, Instagram, anything you can think of for all of the content updates. Everything happens very, very quickly in the world of sports, and we have people covering every sport you could think of, from football to basketball to baseball to wrestling. So anything you need, you can find it on the GSMC pages, so definitely follow along there. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.